the Metafinance podcast. And as always, there are a couple issues with doing these Google Hangout podcasts. Issue number one is that they manage the camera back and forth sort of thing. So they're acting as your director, producer, kind of like that guy in the Oscars, and they show, hey, go camera 2, go camera 1. He's nominated for something. The other problem with these Google Hangouts that I've found is that I'm not sure when the start broadcast button goes live, and it can also take away the voice. See, as exactly, if someone starts laughing, then off camera the voice will pop up, and they'll switch cameras on you, and it'll look all crazy and bouncy and goofy.
So I shouldn't laugh.
With that aside, right, exactly. With that aside, our guest today, who's giggling away because we normally like to spend a couple minutes off camera telling jokes to loosen people up who are not normally
a little stand-up comedy beforehand, get people ready.
Exactly. Yeah. Gini Dietrich is the you know her from two places. Well, you know her from everywhere, but you know her probably from two places. One is writing a book called Spin Sucks, and the blog that's attached to said book. It's kind of the ringleader for corporate communications, PR, integrated marketing, communication, social media type people who are out there doing their own thing and or working in companies doing their own thing and whatnot. And then the other thing you might know her from is a PR firm called Arment Dietrich, and I'm believing that PR firm is probably not accurate anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, I keep getting pushback on that because we still call ourselves a PR firm, but that's what people Google, that's what people search, that's what people hire. So even though we do more than the traditional PR, we still call ourselves that.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. This is supposed to be like one of those living room conversation type things, like you see on the network television programs. I'm working out of my kitchen.
I like the calendar behind you.
Thank you. You know what? That's actually a church scheduling calendar.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it is. It's like the church that we attend goes to a summer schedule where they do worship in the park in the morning and then the traditional worship right afterwards. Nice. And one of the problems that people run into is they sort of tune out during the summer, because if you miss worship in the park, which is a little earlier, you sleep in or something like that, you become one of those families, and we're one of those families. Our youngest is 8.5. And we have attended worship in the park a grand total of 1 time since she's been born. So
I was going to say, to be fair, it's been raining a lot, but since she was born, I'm not giving you that excuse.
Yeah, they always do a rain thing, so they'll tell you in the morning, and they communicate extremely well. But we need something like this to
tell you where to go.
Yeah, to tell us what things we might be missing out on. So I want to talk first of all about because what we want to zero in on with this interview is the cash flow implications and what money management for the entrepreneur, for the small and mid-sized business person, for the person who does what you do, what that looks like. And this is not, well, you should, invest in XYZ mutual fund, but this is more about the day-to-day operational type stuff that happens. And especially when you run a business, which with both of us have had to do, and you manage things like cash flow, and you have to worry about who you pay when and those sorts of things, the impact of those sorts of decisions on the small business, the mid-sized business, the business that's in a creative sort of realm like yours, and the virtual business. And I guess the biggest thing that I've seen, and I've done a couple of contract things in bigger corporations where you watch this happen up front, and you're like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And I know this has impacted you in the past as well, is this movement toward bigger companies saying, yes, we want to work with you. We think you add tremendous value as an organization, so we want to bring you in and have you help us out with this problem. However, we are a net 60, 90,
120
organization. Yeah. And so we're going to sit on your cash. that happens. It happens a lot. A lot of companies are changing to this sort of model.
Yep.
The bigger you are, the more excuse you
Yep.
have to do this. So how do you, as the person running the show and running the books for your company, how do you deal with this sort of thing?
One of the things we did, right after 2011, when the debt ceiling happened, and what happened with that is because it was on the tail end of the recession, everybody put the brakes on paying their bills. So even though you had accounts receivable out, and people were paying within 15 days or 30 days, everybody said, wait a second, we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't want to go through what we just went through 2 years ago, so we're not going to pay anybody anything. And so you went from having, $40,000 or $50,000 a month in accounts receivable out to not getting paid for 90 days, and you have payroll. You still have to make your bills, right? So one of the things we did is we implemented a deposit that you have to pay up front. And even with the large companies, we do this. So we work with a Fortune 5 company, and when they hired us, we said, look, we need a deposit up front. And they said, well, we're 90 days net. And I said, okay, then I guess we start working in 90 days. And that's what we did. It wasn't ideal from the situation of, it sort of was a false start because we got hired and then we had to wait 90 days. But we got the deposit up front. And then because we did that, we sent them an invoice for those 90 days before we started working. So then we were on it was still 90 days out, but it was on a 30-day payment because we hadn't actually started working. So I hadn't brought the team off the bench or anything like that to do the work. So, there are ways you can work around it, but that's one of our rules is we don't work without a deposit. And if you don't pay within 30 days, there's late fees and all that kind of stuff. But we've sort of figured out the process to make it work that way.
What do you do when you get pushback from the company?
We haven't had any pushback, really. The Fortune 5 that I mentioned, they were honest and said, we have 90 days. And I just said, well, if you want to work with us, this is how we work, because we're a small company, and they understood it. So, we just worked inside their system to make it work. So we really haven't had any pushback. Now that said, I own the business and I get to choose who we work with. And I'm very particular about the types of organizations that we work with. So we only really work with people who will work in that sort of process or function.
You mentioned the debt ceiling in 2011, and it's interesting because you'll hear some entrepreneurs talk about the 08, I don't think it was the fiscal cliff, whatever the Great Reset, the stuff that happened right before Obama was elected,
right?
The bailouts and those sorts of things. And when I ran the startup and college admissions, that was the thing that hit us. We were working with a Canadian firm, and all sorts of capital dried up everywhere, including Canada looking across the border and saying, well, we don't think this is going to happen, and they use that as an excuse to sort of get out of this. So you've got those sorts of things happening, and I guess as the entrepreneur, the person running everything for your organization, this other stuff that's out there, and by the other stuff I mean the difference in the massive amounts of government debt, the interest rate stuff that's going on, the discussion about whether or not Janet Yellen is going to say yes. Does that impact your thinking at all?
It does. It didn't before the recession. I'll be perfectly honest. I was hearing stuff about it, and I listened to The Economist, but I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. It's really hard to plan for it, of course. But the big things I'm hearing right now are, to your point, the interest rates, and also that there's a tech bubble burst coming. And we work with some tech firms, so figuring out that's really hard to plan for. But like with one startup, they just got Series B financing, and so we've gone through and invoiced them for the next 12 months, and they've already paid that. So we're paid, through next May, just to sort of avoid some of that stuff. And they got the financing to do all of it and all that. So there are things they think as a business owner you can plan for. There are things that obviously you can't. I don't think anybody was prepared for what happened in 2008 and 2009. It was really bad. I don't think anyone was prepared for that. But having gone through it, it's certainly not the same as the Great Depression, but I think having gone through something like that, you sort of figure out, okay, this is where I'm going to be conservative, and this is where I'm not going to take some risk, but here's some things I can do to continue to grow the business.
All right, one thing I wanted to ask about that I've seen everywhere, and I think some of this is through the magic of retargeting. It seems like everywhere you turn these days, there is a new solution for getting money to small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, some of it falls into the crowdfunding universe. Most of it, though, I'm seeing falls into some sort of non-secured debt financing. So, you know, we won't take your credit report. We won't pull your credit report. And if you've been in business for a couple of years, you know, you can get access to up to, you know, $500,000 or whatever. The ads are everywhere on CNBC. Yep. And it's kind of driving me nuts because I've seen this movie before. Yep. What's your take on these sorts of funding solutions specifically for a business? I'd say a business like yours that doesn't have, you don't have your own tech stuff that you can use as collateral. You don't have, you know, you're not building a different mousetrap or anything like that.
Right.
You're more of a creative, more of a thought leadership type. Yeah. People are paying for your brain, so therefore you can't really fund using your brain. But there seem to be these solutions out there that will say, yes, we'd like to give you money. What do you think of those?
Well, look, I fell into that trap. In 2006, the bank gave me a line of credit way more than I should have had. It was way more than my accounts receivable. It was way more than we had projected in new business. And I used it all. And so when the economy tanked, I had $350,000 in debt and 33 or 34 employees that I had to make payroll. And we lost more than $1 million in revenue. I mean, it was bad. It was bad. And I think to your point, I've heard this tune before, you know, and that's why the banks got into so much trouble during all of this, is because they were lending money, not just to business leaders, but to homeowners that they couldn't afford. They were lending money to all these people that just couldn't afford it. And so I think we have to be really careful about what kinds of debt we take on and be really smart. I mean, I fell into that trap for sure. It's a painful lesson.
Yeah, and I've, you know, having lived through that sort of thing as well. Yeah, it is. It's not fun.
It's not fun. Not fun at all.
Well, on more fun topics though, around financing and operations, you made the decision a couple of years back, which I think, you know, anybody. Hindsight is 20/20, but this looked extremely smart at the time as well, and a lot of people were moving toward this direction, which was to say, we're going to be all virtual. We don't need overhead, because look at all of the for rent signs that are out there.
Right.
It doesn't take Karnak to figure out where this is going. So why don't we not have this huge overhead of having office space, and let's work virtually. And you've done it for how many years now?
It'll be 4 years in November.
Okay, so 4 years in November. You've obviously learned a few things about going virtual from a money standpoint. What are some of the tips that you'd share with people?
Well, I'd like to say that the foresight was that strategic, but it wasn't. The catalyst for it was that I was paying $12,000 a month just in rent in downtown Chicago, and I wasn't paying myself a salary at all. I wasn't taking an owner's draw. I wasn't getting a salary. I was getting nothing. And so here I'm looking at, you know, my expenses and going, why am I paying these guys? Plus, that's just rent. Not to mention, you know, all the services you have in terms of having a server and the copier and the fax machine, you know, all that, and utilities and. So, you know, you're looking at $20,000 to $22,000 a month in having office space. And as the owner, I wasn't getting any reward out of working my butt off. And so that was the catalyst for it. And our goal was only to do it for a year. And then we discovered that A, we all really liked working from home. We loved the flexibility of it. B, it was really cost effective. And C, it has allowed me to hire people that are best for the job no matter where they are in the world. and I don't have to move them to Chicago, you know? People don't necessarily want to move to Chicago, especially if they visit in November or January.
Right.
Not a great place to live right now, not such a great place in the wintertime. So, you know, not everybody wants to move here, but I've been able to, you know, bring on the very best talent no matter where they are in the world. So from that perspective, it was really smart, but it wasn't super strategic from that perspective. You know, some of the tips I would say is you are able to save a ton of money. You know, we don't have any overhead. I have payroll and I have benefits. So in some cases we have 1099s just because we work with 2 people in Canada, so it doesn't make sense to put them on the payroll. We work with 1 person in Spain, same kind of thing. So they're you know, 1099 employees that we just pay with a wire transfer. And then, of course, it depends on which state you're in. We've tried to sort of avoid California and New York just because the tax implications are pretty rigid. But yeah, we pretty much have everybody else. You know, we've got Maine and Oregon and Tennessee and Michigan. I mean, there's people all over the place. So it's been a really, really interesting experience.
Yeah. You touched on something though that a lot of entrepreneurs deal with, which is the fact that at some point you will have to ask whether or not you can pay yourself. And I've seen this a lot of times. I lived it myself, where it's like, all right, you know, do we keep the operation running? Do we handle payroll? And do I just take a month off from eating?
Yes.
How, why, and would you do that again?
Well, I've done it twice since I started the business 10 years ago. And I've done it, so it's been 2 full years that I haven't paid myself. But I think, you know, with like anything else, there are ups and downs. You know, 2 years ago, I had an incredibly good year and I made the most money I've ever made in my whole life. And so we socked a lot of it away. And, you know, some of that's for a rainy day. Some of it's for, you know, saving for college, and some of it's for vacations, and some of it's for, you know, you having your 6 months of savings and all that. So you sock a lot of it away so that you can afford to, it's not fun, but you have ups and downs. And there are certainly going to be many more years in the lifetime of this business that I'm either not going to make a salary or not going to make what I'm accustomed to making. And so that's what the savings is for. You just have to be really good about putting money away, because there are going to be those down years. There just are.
I guess the last advice is going to be a little less about money, although there's some money issues around it, and then a little more about just general operational type stuff. How do you scale? Or is scaling that important to you? Or is there a size that you've either had in the past or are at now where you're saying, you know what, this is pretty good, we can handle this, we don't want to get much bigger? Because especially people who are going to watch this are probably in the mindset of, you know, I should start a business, everybody else is starting a business, what are the financial implications of starting a business? But then again, they're also, which we've all done, thinking a few steps ahead and saying, oh my gosh, if I get this thing to the point where we've got 1,000 employees and we're doing X, you know, several $100 million in business, that's going to be great. I'm going to sell it. And I'm going to live on an island somewhere. But you know, it's not the reality. So, you know, where and when and how and where does that size and scale thing fit into your thinking, your equation?
Well, I have huge aspirations, and I'm highly competitive. So it's every year we put the stretch goals in and we exceed them and we continue on that path. But what I've discovered is, because the Arment Dietrich side is a service business, you really can only make about between $130,000 and $150,000 per employee. So you have to have other revenue sources. So over the last 6-7 years, I've been installing different revenue sources. So I have 2 books. I do a lot of speaking. We created a subscription model through SpinSucks Pro. And this year we launched a coaching program for other PR firm owners. And then this fall, we're going to launch an 8-week course. So there are lots of products that we're adding into the service piece so that we can scale it to the level that I want it. Because you're right. I mean, I'd much rather have 50 employees and a $20 million business than a $20 million business with 200 employees. I'd much rather that, because you can't scale. It's really difficult to scale people. So we're trying to figure out different revenue sources that have products around our intellectual property.
So to wrap it up, final advice, final thoughts, things that you would say, oh my gosh, you're going to run into this as an entrepreneur in a couple of years and it's going to drive you crazy, and this is what I would suggest doing. What would you say?
You hear that cash is king over and over and over again. And my biggest piece of advice around that is until you experience not having cash, you don't realize how important that is. So always try to manage your cash from the perspective of asking for deposits ahead of time. Don't take on more debt than you can afford. Don't bring on people or payroll until you can afford them. Figure out different ways to work with people. Maybe you bring them on for 90 days or 6 months on a 1099 as a freelancer and then fold them in. If one of the things we're looking at is reducing our benefits because of the health insurance exchange. Are there things that we can do around that, and then maybe add a premium on top of that for people who want? So there's lots of things that I think you can test to really manage your cash. And you have to be fearless about letting people go or scaling back when your cash is getting low. You have to, because if you don't have cash, you can't make payroll, you can't pay for benefits, you can't make your rent, you can't do anything. And that's really, really bad. Sometimes you have to experience it, but I highly recommend you not have to experience it.
Great advice. Jenny Dietrich, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And we'll see everybody next time when we do another edition of the Metafinance Show. Thanks.
Bye.